Okay, so let's talk about the two branches of the immune system. There's the innate immune system or innate response, which responds very quickly, right, within hours. And that is the macrophages, the neutrophils, and the mast cells that are responsible for that. And they release cytokines to bring in other cells, such as cells from the adaptive immune system. The mast cells cause vasodilation by releasing histamine. There's opsonization occurring, where the complement system is tagging different antigens and bacteria so that they can be phagocytosed by the macrophages and the neutrophils. So that system is a very fast system. It doesn't have any memory. It behaves the same way every time a foreign invader tries to get into the body. Okay? And we'll spend more time talking about that. The adaptive immune system is that slower system to respond, and that consists of T and B lymphocytes, and they're going to develop a long-term memory to this particular infection, so that next time this infection shows up, they'll be ready to attack. Okay? So they take days to really form a powerful immune response to a particular infection, but they have a fantastic memory of that particular infection so that they can respond next time it appears. Okay, and we'll talk about the adaptive immune system as well. Okay, so the innate immune system, the very rapid response. We spent some time talking about this in the last module because inflammation is definitely part of the innate immunity, right? So it's really the body's permanent barrier to foreign material. It's always present and waiting, okay? And it protects the body from any entry of microbes or antigens. It does not establish any kind of a memory to the infection or the antigen. So it'll behave the same way every time something tries to invade the body. And it really doesn't distinguish between whether you had a bacterial infection last week or a splinter in your finger, or whether you have a viral infection. It's just going to respond the same way. Okay? So what are the mechanisms of the innate immune system? Well, it's those barriers, so those epithelial barriers in your skin and your mucous membranes, such as in your mouth, your digestive tract, that will sense foreign invaders and antigens and respond in the same way. The phagocytic cells we spoke about, the neutrophils and macrophages that are going to try and destroy the foreign invaders. There's also natural killer cells. We're not going to spend too much time talking about them, but they can directly kill infected cells. And all of the plasma proteins that occur and are released by the liver and by some of the neutrophils and macrophages. So for example, cytokines are released by macrophages and neutrophils to attract other cells to the area of inflammation. The complement system is just a group of proteins that are produced by the liver, and they are involved in tagging the foreign antigens in a process called opsonization, so that the neutrophils and macrophages identify these tagged foreign invaders and destroy them. Okay, so These are the two systems of the immune system, the innate immunity and the adaptive immunity. And when I think of the innate immunity, I'm really thinking of macrophages and neutrophils. Okay. Now, some of the other white blood cells are involved there as well, the eosinophils and the basophils, uh, and of course the mast cells, since they release histamine. And you have your proteins, such as the complement system, that are circulating in the tissue as well to tag the foreign invaders. And what about the dendritic cells? Well, those are cells that hold on to the antigen or the microbe, such as bacteria or virus, and they present the foreign material to the adaptive immune system. So the adaptive immune system likes to be introduced to the foreign invader. And the adaptive immune system are those B cells and T cells. The B cells making those bullet type proteins called antibodies that are going to directly attach to foreign invaders. And then the T cells will divide into T helper cells and cytotoxic T cells called CD8 cells. Okay, and we'll go into more detail. So there's definitely overlap between the innate immune system and the adaptive. And one of the main ways of having this overlap is that the neutrophils and the macrophages can release cytokines and communicate with the adaptive immune system. Okay, so let's look at the adaptive immune system. So the adaptive immune system takes days to weeks to develop to a certain invader of the body. Okay, so it has to be presented with the antigen or the microbe and then form antibodies from the B cells and specific cytotoxic T cells to that particular infection. Okay, so it has an amazing ability to form a memory to specific infections after it's seen that infection only once. Okay, and really this is the basis for immunizations, where we immunize starting in infancy and moving into adulthood. We use different portions of the bacteria or the virus. We inactivate them and we inject them into the body, and the adaptive immune system recognizes the foreign material in the injection and forms long-term memory to those particular infections. So for example, when you get a tetanus shot, well, tetanus, we're actually injecting the toxoid into the body, and the body's forming a very long-term memory to tetanus toxoid. Okay, and when it sees the toxin of a tetanus infection entering the body, it can immediately destroy it. Okay. Another example would be, say, we give a pneumococcal vaccine to a patient. So pneumococcal vaccine is to try and protect against pneumonias and sepsis in adults and in children, actually. And so when we give that vaccine, what we're really trying to do is stimulate the adaptive immune system so that when it sees pneumococcus in the future, it has B cells and T cells ready and waiting to attack. Okay, so there's a variety of immunizations that act in this way. So whether it's hepatitis A, hepatitis B, rabies vaccine, pertussis, diphtheria, mumps, measles, rubella. All we're doing is stimulating the adaptive immune system to protect against those particular infections. So the adaptive immune system consists of T and B lymphocytes. The B cells that can produce specific antibodies to a target microbe, and we call this system the humoral immune system. So it's part of the serum. It's in what's called the humor, which is the liquid part of the blood, right? So it's called humoral immunity. The T cells we call cell-mediated immunity, because the T cells don't mind getting up close with the infection and trying to destroy it with their cytotoxic T cells. The T helper cells are coordinators. They help out coordinate the B cells and the T cells together, okay? So really your adaptive immune system consists of humoral immunity and cell-mediated immunity. And how are they triggered? Well, by antigens, right? And whether those antigens are part of a bacteria or a virus or a contaminated wound with soil, they activate the B cells and the T cells to form a long-term memory. Okay, so here's a nice image of the adaptive immune system. So on your left, you have your humoral response. Well, those are the B cells that make antibodies that go throughout the bloodstream to a particular infection, right? So you can imagine your body right now would be loaded with many, many different B cells if you've had immunizations or if you've come in contact with particular infections, because those B cells have incredible memory to immunizations or infections in the past. Okay, on the right you have your cellular response, which is your cytotoxic T cells, those CD8 cells, and they can get very close to the invader and destroy it. Okay, so T cells really don't mind getting in the face of an invading bacteria to destroy it. And in the middle, you have your T helper cells, which can communicate with cytokines, of course, between the humoral response, which is the B cells, and the cellular response, which is the T cells. Okay, and how did this adaptive immune system get presented with the foreign invader? Well, with a type of dendritic cell, and a macrophage can do the presenting. So the macrophage takes the foreign body and introduces it to the adaptive immune system and says, please make antibodies to this foreign invader. Please make cytotoxic T cells and T helper cells so that we can destroy this foreign invader and have a long-term memory so that when it returns again, we can destroy it. Okay, so still on the theme of adaptive immunity, I'll go through this slide fast because I think I've mentioned most of the things on it. The adaptive immunity attacks specific microbes that it's formed a memory to. And how did you form an adaptive immunity? Whether it's from previous infections or from previous vaccinations. Okay? So you really need to be exposed to the infection or the vaccine to have an adaptive immunity to a particular infection. And as I mentioned before, there's two parts of the adaptive immune system, the B lymphocytes that produce those antibodies, which are proteins, by the way, that circulate in the bloodstream and attach to the specific antigens that will then be destroyed. Okay? The cell-mediated immunity, those T cells that can specifically attack antigens. Okay? And the cell-mediated immunity consists of the CD4 and CD8 cells. And you'll see that HIV, for example, which is a viral infection, destroys the CD4 cells. Okay, so it's a disease of the T helper cells. Okay, so when we're talking about cell-mediated immunity, we're really referring to the part that involves the T lymphocytes and directly attack the foreign invaders. Okay, and as I mentioned on the previous slide, there's a presenting cell such as a macrophage that becomes a dendritic cell when it's presenting an antigen or a microbe to the adaptive immune system to activate it. Okay, so here's an image of an antibody. They really are amazing, right? So an antibody is produced by B cells. In actual fact, when B cells become activated to produce antibodies, we then call them plasma cells. That's a relatively minor point. It's just something to add to your information. Okay, so B cells or plasma cells really are the same thing. When we look at an antibody, which is released by the B cell and then circulates throughout your bloodstream, it is looking for a specific antigen to attach to. So if you look on the left arm of the antibody, that antigen might be part of a bacteria, or it might be part of a virus. And once it gets many antibodies attached onto the surface of the bacteria or the virus, then the bacteria or the virus are destroyed very quickly. Okay, so they really are particular for a specific antigen. And if your blood was taken and analyzed, you would have circulating antibodies to many different types of infections that you've been exposed to in your life, and you'd have antibodies to all those vaccinations you've been exposed to as well, unless you didn't respond to the vaccination and didn't make antibodies. And we'll talk about that later, because that is possible to receive a vaccination but not have an antibody response to it. It's a small part of the population that this involves, but some people don't necessarily get a robust antibody response to a vaccination. Okay, so let's talk about some different antibodies that can be made by B cells. And each one has a slightly different function, but they're all antibodies that are proteins. Okay, so IgM is the initial antibody response to a specific infection, meaning when a patient comes in contact with an infection, the first response or the first type of antibody made by the B cells is what's called immunoglobulin M. Okay, so we can actually check IgM levels if we detect a recent infection, say from a viral infection such as hepatitis. We could check an IgM level to see if the B cells recently made antibodies to the infection. IgG, so immunoglobulin G, circulates in the bloodstream once the B cells have created long-term immunity. They produce IgG. So this is really the antibody that lasts for years within the body as a memory to a specific infection. It's also the type of antibody that's passed from the mother to the fetus through the placenta to provide immune protection to the fetus, which lasts even after the fetus has been born, right? So a neonate still has circulating antibodies from the mother for the first few months of life. IgE is an antibody that attaches to mast cells, and in the presence of inflammation or allergies or parasites, IgE causes mast cell release of histamine. Okay, so in an allergic reaction, this is the process where an antigen attaches to IgE on a mast cell, and the mast cell releases histamine, leading to vasodilation and increased permeability through the capillary walls, causing edema. IgA is an antibody that is found in mucous membranes, such as the saliva and other mucous membranes in the gastrointestinal tract. And really, it's there to protect from entry of antigens and infectious agents in the mouth, right? So IgD, I wouldn't spend too much time on. Okay, so just know IgM, initial response to first seeing an infection. IgG, long-term memory to a specific infection. IgE attaches to mast cells, often involved in allergic or parasitic infections, more so allergic since they're much more common. And IgA found in saliva. Okay, so this is just a review of what I just mentioned on the previous slide. Again, I would ignore IgD. It's not terribly important, and just have an understanding of how the other antibodies are involved. All right, so let's talk about cell-mediated immunity, which is the other branch of the adaptive immune system. Right? So we have humoral immunity, which is the B cells and their antibodies, and we have cell-mediated immunity, which is the T cells. So T cells are made in the bone marrow, they migrate into the bloodstream and go to the thymus for further development. Okay? And T cells can actually attach directly to the antigens of invaders. And then this will initiate a set of reactions which will lead to destruction of the antigens that are considered non-self. Okay, so T cells can recognize non-self antigens or infectious agents leading to destruction. They do not produce any antibodies at all. Those are completely the B cells or the plasma cells. And they are highly responsible for defending against infected cells, cancers, and also transplanted organs. So if someone has a transplanted kidney or lung or heart, if they stop taking their immunosuppressants to stop the self from attacking the transplanted organ, it'll be the T cells, it'll be cell-mediated immunity that will attack the transplanted organ, okay? So how does the cell-mediated immunity come into effect? Well, if you remember that one nice image of how the T cells are helping the communication between the cytotoxic T cells and the B cells. So a macrophage will present the antigen to the T cells. So when they present the antigen, they're called antigen presenting cells. And it could be a macrophage or what we call a dendritic cell that presents the antigen to the T cells. The T cells then become activated to become either CD4 cells, T helper cells, or cytotoxic T cells that can directly invade and attack the foreign antigen. So again, pretty amazing system. Okay, let's just look at the two types of T cells again. So there's the CD4 cells that are involved in regulating the other immune cells, right? So they're involved in regulating the B cells, and they're involved in regulating the other T cells, which is the cytotoxic T cells, okay? And they are included in cell-mediated immunity. The CD8 cells, they're the cytotoxic T cells. Directly attacks the antigens or the microbes infecting cells of the body, okay? So if we were to ask, what's the adaptive immune system? Well, that's B cells and T cells. What's the cell-mediated part of the adaptive immune system? The T cells, okay? What's the humoral part of the adaptive immune system? The B cells. Okay, just another slide to try and solidify your information of adaptive immune system, right? The two parts of it. The humoral, which is the B cells, which can become plasma cells when they produce antibodies, and the long-term memory B cells that retain a memory to that specific infection. Of course, the antigen is engulfed by, say, a macrophage. We're looking at the middle here, and that gets introduced to the T helper cell, the TH cell in this slide, and the TH cell can communicate with the B cell and communicates with the cytotoxic T cell. Okay, so all of this, when you see it, when you look at the bottom of all these cells, they have active T cells to deal with the infection that's in front of them today, and memory cells, such as memory B cells, memory T helper cells, and cytotoxic memory cells. Okay, so this system takes days to develop, but when it develops, it has a lot of powerful immune system attack, plus also the memory cells that it forms. So this can happen with an acute infection, or this will happen with an immunization.